Hey, good morning. I'd like to call this meeting of the Darien Board of Education Facilities Committee to order. It's Thursday, January 19th at 9 a.m. Our chair, Dennis Maroney, is here, but in France. So have a croissant for us, Dennis, and I'm happy to facilitate for you today. Thank you for being here this morning.
Thank
Okay, we're going to just switch the order of the agenda this morning and start with the capital project request for Darien High School Auditorium Technology Upgrade for the year 23-24. Colleen Thompson, I'll pass it to you.
Good morning. Thank you for amending the agenda. So as you can see from the memo in the packet, we're asking for some improvements to the auditorium. And we are requesting these improvements based on recommendations from myself, Jeff DeMeo, and we used an outside consultant to walk through and really just kind of help us pinpoint some of the areas that could use improvement. Just to give you a little background, I came into the district in July of 2020, and we weren't running live events in the auditorium. And when we resumed events in the auditorium during the 2021-2022 school year, it became clear to me that we needed to upgrade our systems, particularly audio and video, which is why those items are listed first in the request. In a space as large as ours, you need quite a bit of amplification for speakers and performers. And so just to highlight a few of the really important needs, our existing speaker boxes on the front of the stage. Those of you who have been in the space, you'll see two small speakers in front of the stage. Those are really not sufficient to deliver the type of sound that we need to produce for really any presentation on stage, let alone musical and theatrical. Other really important needs, we only have 3 working microphones of the existing that were delivered 15 years ago. So we're actually renting equipment currently for most concerts and events. And then another really important need is that we don't have usable video equipment for recording and streaming. So we're relying on DAF Media to stream our events, and they do a great job, but they're often unavailable as they stream our athletic events as well. And then finally, the controls we're using to communicate between operators in the booth, the catwalks, and the stage are only partially operational. And the controls we're using to really control the entire audio system are complicated, outdated, and need to be upgraded with newer technology to reduce the operational complexity and improve the quality of events and performances. So those will just highlight what I see as our most important needs in the memo.
Okay. I'll turn to the committee in a second, but just to start. So one of the comments that's come up about this is that we hadn't seen, excuse me, an auditorium upgrade in the capital plan. And so we've asked questions as a board, and we've been asked questions by other town bodies. Could you all, before you continue this, just talk to us about why this became a priority? I hear you talking through the needs, but why did we just see this now? And why is it a priority among other things that you might have selected?
I think it's fair to say that there were some preliminary discussions prior to COVID in that particular area. But predominantly, we have a new director of music who's come on board, has observed and practiced the quality of the services we're receiving. I actually had the opportunity to hear both differences, what it would sound like, and to me, I'm not an artist by any means, but just to the layman person, the quality of it when you hear the difference is tremendous. But fundamentally, Colleen come aboard, and with the review of the program itself, the program needs and the current status, between herself and Jeff has always been sort of advocating here and there along the way. And with Colleen coming on board, that synergy was brought to the table, and we thought it would be appropriate to put it now, identify it now as part of the capital project.
Okay.
I think one of the biggest things that you have is, so when Colleen came on, it was during COVID, and the auditorium was essentially offline and not usable because of those reasons. And then as it started to come back online, because we came out of that pandemic, Colleen got the opportunity to see firsthand what it looked like. We also have a new facilities director on board too. And so the combination of having a relatively new director of music who, while she's been here for a couple of years, has only really been able to utilize the auditorium maybe for not even half of her tenure here, and then a new facilities director gave an opportunity to kind of evaluate the needs
Okay.
of that space.
Thank you. Okay. Colleen, anything to add to that?
No, that really is pretty much that describes really the process since I came on board, for sure.
Okay. All right. I'll toss to the committee for questions. Dennis, you have anything to kick us off?
Yep, my question that I have is, are there any grants that we can, excuse me, are there any grants that can be done from facilitating the arts or anything like that that can be used to this?
It's not unusual that potentially you could look to local organizations. I won't name them all. I think they're pretty familiar to people if there was a desire to do that or a need to do that. It doesn't preclude that by any means.
Have there been any preliminary discussions with the local organizations?
No, certainly not from my office. There has not been.
Okay. John or Katie?
I got, so in the document on page 8, it talks about prioritizing investment. So I do see the need for upgrades, and it's very clear there's a need. But what I guess is a comment and a question, how quickly can we understand what the true priorities are, the need to haves, the have to haves, because it's almost inoperable. And I think Jeff reflects on some of those elements in his report. But if that can be broken down from a budget standpoint, that'd be really helpful. And then like the nice to haves. I mean, I think I understand what the video wall is, but then and maybe this is a wrong comparison, but we have a video screen out at the stadium. Well, that was a nice to have that was funded by private donations, where the have to have was the most basic scoreboard that the school originally funded. So I'd really like to understand what's critical for curriculum, what's critical for fabulous productions, which do go on now under challenged circumstances with the equipment and the facility, and then what are kind of the extras. And so that leads me to maybe request or explore. In previous years, I've heard often from our partners on the Board of Finance and even, some members of the RTM that, hey, listen, when we have a capital project, it doesn't always have to be in the budget process, if you will. Take that out and seek an appropriation separate from that. So in the element or taking account where we are in this budget process, and we're quickly, running out of time, if you will, excuse me, with the Board of Ed's schedule. Is this something that we could carve out, really give it some thought, give a nice presentation, and then make the case outside of the budget process? And I'm not punting this to another fiscal year. That's not my intent, but really so that we show our constituents, even our students or parents, that we're really being thoughtful in what we're doing here. Give a tour of the facility, if you will, and have Jeff, show us, the complexities of running this thing. I think that'd be really helpful and actually build an element of support. So I guess if Rich or Alan could answer my question about perhaps taking this outside the budget cycle to give us a little more room.
Well, is the question first?
Well,
What could be
there's two of
done
them.
during the budget cycle? Like, is
Yeah,
there
but-
time to do this work during the budget cycle?
Well, yeah,
Rich?
is there time to do this work during the budget cycle, given some of the elements that I just outlined? And can it be taken outside the budget cycle? Because I don't think we're in the position today to break out the audio system. Is it 100% have to have, or is there some nice to haves?
Okay.
So
Well, Colleen and Rich, can you guys answer that?
If Colleen maybe wants to talk a little bit about just the video
Yeah.
wall, since that was
Yeah.
specifically mentioned about the reason for it, and then we can talk about the budget cycle.
Sure.
And actually, Colin, you can talk to whether you think any of these items can be prioritized.
Yeah, let me speak to the prioritization first. If I'm looking through, there are obviously some elements that need to be done together, but there are we could, in essence, break it down further. I would suggest that the most important investments now would be the audio system, the intercom, the streaming and recording, and the Deca tree mounting. those are the systems that are currently partially inoperable. In that, we don't have the microphones that we need to produce a typical performance without renting them. We don't have the capabilities to currently stream in-house, and even make a recording of reasonable quality in-house. And for example, the Deca tree, I was able to show Dr. Adley in our initial discussions. We were able to temporarily mount this high quality piece of recording equipment that we have now, and use some iPads and other video devices to show what it would look like if we were able to upgrade the system entirely. So those are really the biggest priorities if we were to break it down further. So I'm certainly able to do that.
Okay, Rich?
And then follow up on it.
So in terms of the budget cycle, any capital project obviously can go in the budget cycle or out of the budget cycle. It really depends on the comfort level of the board having to go through the appropriation process. If we looked at, I believe it was last year, we actually took the 4th Suburban out of the capital budget, and then we went kind of off cycle, will you say, in terms of where the Board of Finance ended up funding it from their capital reserve account. And so obviously that could certainly happen. If it's a project like this, you'd have to put out to bid, you'd have to get an engineer to put out a bid scope of work. And so if we were to want to do this work, let's say in the summer, that part of the project would have to probably start in April, where you're actually writing that bid, you're getting that engineer on board, which you would have to have some type of funding to do. And then you would go out to bid, and then you'd actually start to do the work. I would imagine if this is approved as part of the budget cycle, this is going to be part of the tour of schools. However, obviously that's after the board makes their decision in February, because the tour of the schools is in March. But whether, any capital project can be on or off cycle, it's really the comfort level of this board and then the RTM and the Board of Finance as to whether or not they want to do an appropriation process or not.
And I'd just like to follow up. This is with the utmost transparency, that we're not trying to, finagle the budget and, spread it out and slow drip type strategy. It would be, in my mind, I would consult with our partners. But I guess now, hearing the answer to my first part of my question, is it possible to get some sort of prioritized schedule to us by, ag cut night?
Yeah.
We can do that.
Okay, that would be really helpful. And also, if there's a nice to have versus need to have, and maybe that's not a fair question, but that kind of fits in the priorities. I would.
But I'll say that we'll prioritize it as far as we're able to,
Okay.
and the process allows us to. Yes.
Thank you.
And I can just add a little bit more to that. I would say in this proposal, what I just described are the need to have nows. And, there are other items that I would consider. I do consider them all need to haves, and I can speak more to the video wall if necessary, but I would consider something like that a need to have soon. And I can describe a little bit more about that if it's helpful.
That's great. Thank you. One more follow up.
Do you want that done today, the
well,
video wall?
I don't think we
A
have
little bit
time,
more
given our
about it?
time constraints.
Okay.
Do you agree?
That's fine.
Okay. And I'd like thoughtful answers, not on the fly. I want it prepared and really
Okay.
get good thoughts from the staff and administration. Rental expenses. So what kind of rental expenses will we forego if we do, carry forward with the project? And maybe another follow-up for our next Board of Ed meeting. You can say, well, because we're replacing this equipment, we save these dollars on the rental side, and that hopefully will help with the prioritization also.
Sure, we can get those numbers.
So we can get those numbers for more in depth. A lot of the rentals end up actually hitting your student activity account as opposed to your operating budget, because it's rentals for, let's say, like Theater 308 and things like that. And so that they have to absorb that fundraise or the gate receipts that really cover that. There are minimal costs to the operating budget. I mean, there are some in RC 13, but not significant.
But it'd be nice to see also what would hit the student activity account too.
So what does that mean? I know that Theater 308 typically runs our theater programs, but we have, a lot of concerts and things like that. So how are those handled? Do we just not need the rental equipment, or do we run them at a different level of
Sources.
or a different level of, I'll use the word quality for the moment, at the time, currently.
I think it's really both. You know, for example, when we bring in an event, such as last year we had Dallas Brass. I think some of you are familiar with that. Or you know, we have our district-wide festivals yearly, or we have a larger concert that is, you know, for example, Holiday Spectrum that we had in the past. We will you know, get funding from various sources, RC13, Darien Music for Youth, student activities funds. And if we had the speakers, the microphones in-house, then we'd be able to dedicate more of those costs to the actual performance aspect and to curriculum, rather than having to rent and piece together equipment for each of these events. I think that's the best way to describe it.
Thank you. And Rich, can you clarify the timeline too? So I understand you'd want to have funding in place by April, so you could go out to bid.
So ideally, obviously, the RTM doesn't officially approve it until May, but if we end up getting to a point where the Board of Ed approves it, we have the ability to actually start drafting that RFP, because you can always draft an RFP, issue an RFP, and then
Right.
award nobody.
Right.
But the time to create that RFP is significant. So if the board, let's say, were to go forward with this in any capacity, we'd probably want to start drafting that RFP in the spring. So we're ready to kind of like put it out there in May and get responses in June. And so we could start to do that work over the summer.
Okay, so you're looking for you can put the RFP out before going to contract. So you're looking for having money in the bank by June?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, please. Thank you, Colleen. Just to kind of follow up on what Mr. Sini was asking, in terms of prioritizing what is really necessary in order to run the auditorium at the level that we want. It would be great to also hear a bit about the impact that these upgrades would have on students, the number of students that would be impacted, how these upgrades improve student experience. I believe that Jeff had made some comments before about the way that students can learn to use them and sort of the professional experience and training. So those considerations would be really helpful as well, beyond just the functionality and the financial, but also what our students are really getting out of it.
Absolutely. And when we were doing the walkthrough, we actually did a walkthrough with Tim Sorensen, Chris Andre, John Grauer, all of the teachers who you know, really run curriculum here and, you know, run the music tech curriculum, the performance music, and the theater curriculum. And when we were consulting with Paul Merchant from CES, those were really our biggest considerations, were how this would improve curriculum. So I think I'd be happy to put together more detailed information about those aspects.
I got one more follow-up, Jill.
Go ahead.
Would it be safe to say the constraints with the DAF are more equipment related versus, you know, student resource related, i.e. if you had more cameras, more production equipment, you can fill the roles. It's just you don't have the equipment right now because, you know, DAF has other responsibilities to tape things.
Correct. We don't have the equipment. And also, you know, even with DAF, you know, DAF, the equipment that they have is typically used for, you know, sporting events. So when we're talking about recording, you know, musical performances, the equipment that we're requesting is really more specific and a different quality level, so that we can record and stream high level audio as well as video.
Just to reflect, one of the things we've talked about in the years I've been on the board is like embellishing on that awesome relationship that we have on the DF. So it seems like this, by, you know, upgrading the equipment, we could take kind of the production from the curriculum side as well as volunteer on the DF side to another level. So that sounds pretty cool, like a very neat opportunity going forward. So thank you.
As we're looking at that prioritized, oh, go ahead, Dennis.
Colleen, while I appreciate Mr. Sini's point about adding, you know, prioritizing the list, and I think that would be most helpful, I also would like to I don't know if it's kind of see, or I would like to know as well of something that is maybe a nice to have, are we already going to be venturing into something else already? And if we wanted to do that in later years, it would end up costing us twice as much or something like that. So if you could kind of build that into the discussion as well, it would be appreciated, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. So, I think you're saying things that really should be bundled together because they'll cost more in the future if we don't do them now. Yeah.
Correct.
I'm
Thank
happy
you.
to work with Jeff on that as well.
Agreed. Good question, Dennis.
Okay. With that, we're trying to move a little speedily, so I'd suggest, Alan, go ahead.
No, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. For the tasks that we have.
Yes,
It's unlikely, well, it's not going to happen for tomorrow for a board packet, right?
okay,
But it will be prepared and sent out as soon as we can for Tuesday.
that works.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, that works.
And we can review what those are.
Sure.
Okay, but again, I know we want to move a little fast today. So I'm going to suggest we move on to the next item, which is the proposed request for transfer of funds for Darien High School track project.
So we have our staff here today to
Thank you,
talk
Colin.
about the FY23 capital request for the track, where it is in timeline and what it was originally budgeted for versus what has come in as projected and versus probably what we want to do. So either Rich can lead off or and
I can start. So in the current year's capital budget, there was an approval for replacing the tracks, asphalt surfaces and repairs to the jump area for $450,000. We did do an RFP in late October. We had 7 firms come out. None of the firms indicated a desire to bid. Part of the reason they did not want to bid was the quality of the track currently. They felt it was a much bigger project than anticipated. Kevin Monrette, the director of facilities, did reach out to Cape and Island, who did come to the walkthrough but chose not to bid as to, why didn't you bid? Because they do have the state contract. Part of the concern obviously was the makeup of the track and what's needed to improve the track, but also the cost associated with doing the track. Obviously, one of the things that goes into redoing the track is the cost of asphalt. And obviously that's one of the things that we've seen a significant increase over the past few years. They did give us a proposal outside of the RFP process in order to go forward and do it. And they gave us 2 options. One was just kind of the basic resurface, which was the 538,000, I believe it was, that came forward, and then an option for what's called a sandwich system. We do have Nestor Aparicio here, who is the assistant director, who probably talk a little bit more about what a sandwich system is, but essentially it is a higher quality track. It allows you to get more useful life out of the track. The surfacing that lays down helps avoid water going into it, vapor going into it, which ultimately ends up cracking in the track over time. But obviously there's a cost associated with that. It's another couple $100,000 in order to do it, but it's definitely a far superior product. You do get a longer useful life. It's estimated that you could get about 5 more years from the track if you were to do a sandwich system as opposed to not doing the sandwich system. So in our conversations with the town, when we realized that the budget was going to be insufficient in order to do this project, we had a few options available. One was not do the project at all, which isn't really a great option because of the quality of the track. And Chris can talk a little bit about the quality of the track right now. 2, should we just scrap the appropriation, have it rescinded, and then put a new request into the fiscal 24 budget? Or do we ask for an actual whole appropriation to cover the difference? Or do we go to the Board of Finance and ask for a capital transfer? And so in those conversations on the town side, they basically said, well, it depends on how short you are. If you're short by a few $100,000, the ideal process would be to ask for a capital transfer from the Board of Finance, capital contingency fund, assuming that there's funds available, which as of their last meeting was a little over $500,000. If the differential is significantly and we're short far more than that, it really becomes a Board of Ed decision as to whether or not you want to ask for a full appropriation and kind of do it off cycle, or do you want to put it into your capital budget. So since it was within that contingency fund, we felt the most appropriate thing would be to consider a capital transfer appropriation, which would have to go to the Board of Ed and then obviously the Board of Finance. I don't know if Chris, you want to talk a little bit about how the track is right now.
Yeah, excuse me. So in my time here, we've done some top coating, some patching of the track, which has gotten us through the last couple of years. But The track is in need of, think of a complete redo, dig up. It's been a number of years now, so the track we have is certainly sufficient and safe. But we've, over the last couple of years, have just done, the minimum in order to get us through, to I think where we're at right now, which is the need for a new track.
Go ahead,
So
John.
if you want to speak a little bit just about what's involved with this, and then I think we have like one lane that we try to keep away from the students using. We kind of rope off, not really rope off, but the inside lane I know Nestor was talking about is really the biggest issue of the track.
Yeah, so that is correct. So right along the edge of the track in the turf field, we have some curving that's there, and as time has gone by, that has diminished. So it's they can still use the lane, but at times they've opted out and not using it just in case somebody is running around the corner and steps off to avoid any injuries or anything like that. So when it comes to each system, there's two systems that were proposed to us, the BSS 100 and the BSS 300. So the BSS 100 is your standard track that you find in the Northeast, asphalt with black rubber and a spray polyurethane, very thin coat that they put on. That track is permeable, so basically anytime it rains or snow or anything, the water just goes right through it, right down to the earth. So the 300 is asphalt, the black rubber, but the polyurethane is a thicker coat. So with that said, the 300 is impermeable. So basically it keeps the water from going through the track onto the asphalt. And what it does is it keeps, it extends the lifetime of the track, basically. And it keeps it from any water damage on the asphalt, which in time can be, pretty costly. So.
All right, committee questions. Dennis, you want to kick us off? You have anything?
Yeah, I guess the 300 question is, I guess then you have to pitch the track so the water doesn't pool on a track or spill into the field. So you're pitching it towards the outside lanes.
I would think that the track would have to be pitched. We do have areas where the water can go right off along the sidelines of the turf field. So I'm pretty sure that it'd be pitched to those areas so that it can make its way out. So.
And the turf field is permeable too.
Yes, sorry.
Katie, any questions? Okay, John. Other questions?
So I guess first, how old is the track is as old as the high school? Remind me when that
Oh,
is.
yeah, I think it was 4.
04?
2004.
All right, so we're kind of
Close to 20.
yeah, close to 20 years. So when I think of are we saying that BSS 300 is at least 20 years, maybe even 25 years in the next replacement if we were to use that technology?
The non-sandwich system, the 100 typically gets you about 15 years.
Okay.
And then it starts to deteriorate, which is what kind of Chris spoke to earlier, where you start to do that patching. The 300 series, which is the sandwich system, gets you that 20+ years. And so if we were to do the sandwich system, you'd likely not be looking at doing any major repair to that track until 2043-ish, 2045.
Okay. In a stroke of irony, it sounds like Brian McMahon is going through the same replacement this year. There was a headline in the news yesterday or the day before. They're quoting 823,000. I guess one of my requests would be: is there any way that we can work with them, perhaps, or figure out who they're using? Maybe that hurts us because it's going to be more competitive. Maybe it helps because they're so close together. But that's just a comment. Putting my finance hat on, I think I do really would recommend taking this off budget cycle, certainly, and looking for a special appropriation. Again, I want to make sure that we have done all our homework. We're not accused of cutting any corners. I do realize there's a time element because you definitely don't want to be doing this in the fall. I remember Danbury, I think, had a delayed project and wiped out their whole fall. We played football in Brookfield, I think, that year. So
So if we do want to accomplish this right after the school year, we would have to commit to Cape and Island probably by March. Because obviously things, they get their, the bulk of their orders right around now. And so then they start to line up those projects. So the longer you wait, the more it pushes obviously off the project.
Okay, so then that would lead to my next question. Can we squeeze another year out so we don't have to, I don't want to say rush, but expedite this at this point out of the current track? It was deemed safe. Yes, there's some deficiencies. I guess this falls into another question. I've noticed the curbing. I've been told it was never done correctly the first time around because there's like two layers of cement on the curbing that curtains the turf, and it was not part of the turf project. I know that. So sorry to ramble, but can we squeeze another year out safely and effectively, not where we don't have to take a whole lane out? And two, does this include fixing that curbing also permanently, not just putting patches so it disintegrates?
Yes, so when we met with the contractors and did our walkthrough, that was one of the things we pointed out. They said that they would take care of it. Obviously, it has to be a certain height to meet the standards. And as I said earlier, it's been diminished a little bit. So they've at times not use that lane just to make sure for safety purposes, but it was pointed out to the contractor, and they said they take care of that and fix it properly.
Yeah, and again, my question is about pushing out is not again to delay or defray or anything like that, but I really want to make sure this project can get completed in time, because based on what the kids have been through in athletics, through COVID and such, the idea of taking any sort of events off campus would be pretty difficult, and I don't want to put the kids in that situation one bit. So I guess I'll just.
So I mean, Cape and Island did say if we can commit to them by that, early May or early March, timeframe, then they'd be able to get it done this summer. Obviously, the longer we wait, then obviously you're not going to have it done over the summer. Whether we defer it or not, obviously the longer you defer it, the more it deteriorates. But I would defer to Chris as to whether or not they could leave it.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say, if we do decide to defer it, we have to take a look at what we currently have. It's used every day, even through the winter. It's used 3 seasons, fall, winter, even up until when there's snow on it. We have athletes in the indoor season who do go outside to train on these, 40, 45 degree days. We service hundreds of kids on boys and girls side for 3 seasons. We would just take a look at it, make sure it's safe for use. To get us through another.
I know the utility has seen snow blowers on there in March as well. So if I might suggest, is it possible that you guys can take a look at it before our board discussion? Because I would think that this is something we want the board, of course, we want the board to weigh in, but we're talking like a month and a week or a month and 2 weeks to make a decision and have it approved to go forward, and we are going to be working with multiple town bodies for the appropriation.
So
Just one.
town body.
Just Board
sorry.
Finance.
Board of Finance.
Board of
Chris,
Finance.
can we host meets and stuff with this current condition?
Sure, we'd be happy to do that.
No, say, can we host
Host
meets?
meets.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I think you host meetings. Yes, we can host meets. We have, I think, scheduled 3 or 4.
But in its current condition?
In its current, we're going to host these this spring anyway, right?
Yeah.
So we weren't planning on moving any of
we're
our
talking
home
about
meets this
next year,
spring,
though.
so.
So we need to evaluate, that's a good question. If we could evaluate that, if we'd be comfortable hosting meets the following year, given the rate of deterioration.
Yes.
Yeah, that and any, interim small repairs. We don't be throwing money at this track, but if there's some patching that can be done to just, and take us one more year, so we're not expediting this.
I think the obviously the unknown is what happens between now and next
Right.
summer. We were planning on using this spring safely, which we don't know is how it's going to be impacted between, this today and,
So that could be,
summer.
if that could be, some of the input to the board when we.
So Rich, I'd be curious, your perspective. This is a bid based on, I would assume, asphalt prices where they're starting to come down. Do we have any feeling that there might be an advantage to waiting a year from a pricing perspective?
So asphalt, so oil prices are coming down a bit. The concern is that obviously if it deteriorates more, you might save a little bit on the oil prices, but then the work that has to be done is going to be even more extensive. So there's no guarantee that you're
Okay.
going to save money by waiting. I will say Cape and Island is a premier company. They did the track in New Canaan. I believe they did the track in Wilton.
Okay.
We can also check with Brian McMahon. I can reach out to Norwalk, or Chris, you could reach out to the AD to find out who they're using. But in this area, Cape and Island is really the premier company that you'd want to use. They, like I mentioned earlier, they did come to the walkthrough. They had concerns about the structure of the track. And obviously our current budget's obviously online and everybody knows what the appropriation was and everybody knew it wasn't going to be quite enough to do the work that was necessary.
Yeah, and maybe that's the answer. This is our only, the only shop in town, if so to speak, and it's by delaying it a year, we're really not going to gain any sort of efficiencies and, they say they can get it done. So that
I mean, I will
feedback would be
say,
helpful.
some of the companies that came through the walkthrough aren't necessarily track companies, they're paving companies, right? And so while they can do the work and it's paving, it's not quite the same as having a company that specializes in a track.
No, it's well known that tracks are not driveways. I mean, so let's get the right contractor in there too, definitely.
Thank you. I just want to again reiterate that in having these conversations, it is nice to be reminded of student impact. Chris, I appreciate your comment on the numbers of students that use that track. It really is used by a lot of teams in their conditioning, in their training, and their timings. We do have running teams, boys and girls, from freshmen, huge teams of students that run the entire school year. The cross country team uses it. They time their miles at the beginning. There are indoor track teams that are running outdoors every day right now because it doesn't quite feel like winter. And then we have indoor track teams that are very large. So I think that's an important consideration. I understand that this is a big project. Full disclosure, I am a track parent. And at the end of the cross country banquet, it was incredible to hear the coaches talk wonderfully about every individual runner, but it was also interesting to note how many of them had injuries. So I certainly would take the safety of all of our athletes quite seriously. And to John's point about potential disruptions, I think that's a good thing to ask. What is our timeline to get things done? If we are pushing things out, what kind of impact would it have if part of the track had to be, sort of covered to be able to access the fields? I think it's important to think about how much that facility is used and by how many students.
Just to note that, so just talk to your point about the wear and tear, the 300 series, which is the higher level series, is what New Canaan used. It is the preferred, series sandwich system for the wear and tear, the pounding that the kids have, think about the training they do every day on that track. So that's the preferred.
Wear and tear on bodies, not just wear and tear on tracks.
Right. Yes, wear and tear on bodies. Right. And then to John's point about timing, it would have to be done during the summer. They want to impact all the fall teams that use that facility. When you take the track repair offline, you're taking essentially the stadium field offline too. So we've had, Danbury, Ridgefield, Greenwich have to take their stadium offline because of work done that spilled into the fall season. So,
and we certainly don't want to wait too long where we have to take it offline either. So I know there's kind of a small window of opportunity here. I will say the permeable pavement, just in my personal use and when I was in planning and zoning, it stinks. I mean, too much water gets in there in the Northeast and it just expands when it freezes and you have pebbles everywhere. So no way, we're going to go with it.
So I asked a question earlier, Rich, about asphalt pricing, but I want to come back to it. Is it your impression, we do know asphalt or the oil price has been driving it. That is potentially a component of this, but how much of a component of the price increase do you think is actually the scale of the work versus raw material pricing?
I think even if oil prices were down, when these bids came in, we were going to be over. I mean, the common theme among all the contractors that did the site walkthrough was this is not just an easy repair, that there's some issues with the track that have to be addressed. So I think even if oil prices were to come down to $450,000, that was a lot in the budget, wouldn't be sufficient.
Okay. And then summer school, it was going to be impacted no matter when we do this, because of course we will do it in the summer. Can we talk about the impact on summer school? Is this year's summer school prepared for the fact that they're, because I know they cross the track to get onto the field. Like when we did the cafeteria, we had to do a lot to accommodate. And we did that paving. We had to do a lot to accommodate summer school. Can we talk about what's happening with that?
So it would certainly impact Darien Summer School.
Mhm.
Because obviously the track would have to be offline. Some of those fields would have to be relocated. So you would certainly have maybe certain camps that might not be able to run during the summer as we take this offline.
Mhm.
Obviously, the goal would be to have it online for the start of the school year.
Right.
There would be no scenario where whether we do it this year or you do it in a future year,
Right.
where you're not going to impact Darien Summer School.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that we're fortunate to have running path too. So I think programs that might have naturally taken place on the track could be still held, on campus in the running path. So
Okay.
I think we just have to reshuffle some programs around to
Okay.
have our same offerings.
So have we made a budget adjustments downwards for not running things, or have for the time being, we've just tried to shift programs?
So I think we would shift programs, but it's also, if we're not going to necessarily run track, a lot of these kids will just enroll in something else.
Okay, so we might see some attrition.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So
Question, Jim?
currently, oh, go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, just, so if I'm hearing correctly, I guess I have the question on,
Hey, Dennis, you
Do you
gotta
know-
speak into the mic a little better, please.
Sorry.
Thank you.
do we know what has caused the deterioration of the track? Is it, as Mr. Sini was saying, is it that our current track has the permeability and the water's getting in there, freeze thaw, and the underlayment of the track is deteriorating, or is it something else?
So it is a 20-year-old track, and at the time where it was constructed, you didn't use the equivalent of the sandwich system that was done. So it is well past its useful life.
Okay.
So there's no other concern, just the useful life?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right, so in terms of next steps, then, Rich and Co, we're gonna follow up with Brian McMahon. You'll talk to us about the impact of another year. I think when you come back, please come with a timeline for this so that we can see very clearly what it would be if you did it this year. I think it's important to note the impact of summer school to the board.
Mhm.
Again, it's inevitable, but I think it needs to be noted. And you'll talk a little bit about the sandwich system on the 24th.
Yep.
Okay, but I think let's go ahead and bring it forward to the board on the 24th, Alan.
So currently on the agenda, I'm certainly can speak to the board chair that the word is on the agenda is possible request to the Board of Finance to make a reserve transfer from their reserve account.
I think you need to bounce it up to discussion as well.
Yeah,
So
I have no problem. I mean, if the board wants to move forward with it, we should have that opportunity, but we need to have that discussion. Yeah, as part of it.
So I think that, yeah, the recommendation from the committee today is that the facilities committee is if this were a perfect world, we'd sit on it one more time, but we understand the timelines. We want to bring it to the board and just go for a board decision. We certainly support the concept, but there's a few outstanding questions.
And the time element, we're
The
down
time element.
to 6 weeks or less.
Okay,
So we'll probably address the auditorium process through the question process, and this will remain, the track will remain as a discussion and possible action.
You mean the budget question process?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
As opposed to another agenda item.
versus another.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I mean,
That's perfect.
And Dennis can highlight kind of some of the discussion items that we had here in your committee report.
Okay, motion to adjourn.
Public comment?
Public comment?
Thank you. Public comment?
There are no raised hands.
Okay, and there's no one in the audience. So,
Motion.
all right, motion to adjourn. Thank you, John, for helping. All right,
Thank you all.
all in favor?